During the 80s and 90s, the Mafia controlled New York's criminal underworld. It's well known that the Mafia pay off New York cops to turn a blind eye to their ruthless crimes. But by the early 2000s, a series of killings revealed that the Mafia has gone much, much further.
2 cops who were hitmen for the mob. I mean, it was not like anything that we had ever seen before.
The body of a businessman tied to the Lachaise crime family, dumped in a makeshift grave. The brutal murder of an innocent young man on Christmas Day. The slaying of a Gambino hitman and close associate to the infamous John Gotti. The murders lead a team of dedicated detectives into a game of cat and mouse with 2 of their own, and with them, the mob.
This was the biggest corruption case in the history of the New York City Police Department.
New York. Cops discover the body of Eddie Lino, a captain in the Gambino crime family. Lino was well known to the police as a mob hitman. Lino had recently been connected to the killing of Paul Castellano, an assassination that cleared the way for John Gotti to become head of the Gambino family. Police go door to door and find a witness. Although too far away to identify the killers, she saw enough to allow police to piece together what happened.
There was a witness who reported that they had seen what appeared to be a police light and what looked like a routine police stop.
The killing bore all the hallmarks of a Mafia hit. The 2 shooters posing as police. It's a tactic that's been used many times before.
There were many reported events of police impersonation, and it wasn't outside the realm of what organized crime members were capable of, and that is to, brandish shields, to get a car that looked like a police car, to use flashing lights.
Posing as cops to kill informants has become an unexpected downside of the success of the RICO law. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, meant that once immune mob bosses can now be indicted for crimes carried out in their name. Facing 20-year sentences for racketeering, the number of mafiosi breaking the code of silence and talking to the police has risen drastically. It looked like Lino had been silenced, and with the eyewitness information inconclusive, the case was dropped.
Without new information, there was really nothing for the law enforcement authorities investigating to pursue.
But it's not only the success of the RICO Act that is being fatally undermined. The NYPD have an uneasy feeling that someone is feeding the names of witnesses to the mob before they can testify.
During my years, I've never lost an informant, but I know that people have.
Suspicions grow that there's a mole within the NYPD. But who is it? With 10,000 police in the department, identifying a bad apple won't be easy. When the police raid the home of mobster Rosario Gambino, they make a breakthrough. Rosario was a heroin trafficker for the notorious Gambino godfather, John Gotti.
Rosario Gambino was a made man inside the Gambino crime family. He had real power within that family. He was a man of respect, as they like to call him.
Hidden in his house are police documents, copies of classified NYPD reports containing intelligence on the Gambino family. The information could only have been fed to him by someone within the force. When the documents are dusted for fingerprints, police suspect the worst.
When they were processed for fingerprints, the fingerprint of Louis Eppolito was found on one of the documents.
Louis Eppolito has always worked under a cloud of suspicion because his family has ties to the Gambino family. Although he has a reputation for being a hard cop who gets results, his grandfather was a friend of Lucky Luciano, and his father was a made man.
It was not shocking to some people in the police department that Louis Eppolito's fingerprints were found on that document, because there was always the suspicion that he had, these mob connections.
Eppolito protests his innocence, but no one is ready to listen. The detective is suspended, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. When Eppolito is given a straightforward choice between retiring on full pension or facing a trial, he surprises everyone. He wants to go to trial, to clear his name in front of a judge. In April 1985, he goes to trial, determined to stop the rumors.
He was very, very angry with the police department for bringing the Rosario Gambino case, because in his mind, it proved that they never trusted him.
The case rests on the fingerprints. The police claim they can prove that Eppolito handed the documents to the mob. But Eppolito puts forward a simple defense.
Eppolito was able to make an argument that he had looked at these documents for a case he was working on and then put them back. There was no way of disproving that.
The evidence was insufficient, and he was ultimately cleared of those charges and restored to full duty.
Eppolito is vindicated, but despite being cleared, the whispers continue to haunt him.
There were factions within the department and within the law enforcement community that felt that he might have dodged the bullet.
For 10 years, Eppolito lives under a cloud of suspicion. When he eventually retires to a gated community in Las Vegas, he's still angry about his treatment at the hands of fellow cops. He decides it's time to share his story with the world and write a book about being a detective with mob connections. He gives the book the ironic title, Mafia Cop. The book is a hit, and Eppolito gets invited on the talk show circuit. If Eppolito hoped to exorcise his demons, one television appearance will bring them back to haunt him. In Staten Island, a woman called Betty Heidel sits down to watch daytime TV. When she sees Eppolito, it hits her like a sledgehammer.
She recognized him immediately.
10 years earlier, Heidel's son, Jimmy, had disappeared. She vividly remembers that on the day he vanished, 2 men claiming to be cops came looking for Jimmy. She remembers so clearly because they roughed up her younger son. There was something about those 2 men that never sat right. Betty had always been convinced that they were involved in her son's disappearance. Now, 10 years later, Heidel believes she is looking at one of the men on the television. Heidel heads to the local store in search of Mafia Cop.
She went out and purchased the book. And lo and behold, in the book was a photograph of Steve Caracappa, a very close associate of Detective Eppolito's. And she realized quickly that that was the second detective that she had seen outside the house that day.
Convinced that Eppolito and Caracappa were the men looking for her son, Heidel goes to the police. She is interviewed by cold case specialist, Detective Tommy Dades, a decorated 20-year veteran of the NYPD. Dades listens closely to Heidel's story.
Betty imparted some information to Tommy that she had never told anyone in law enforcement before. And that was on the day that her son Jimmy disappeared, Lou Eppolito and Steve Caracappa were outside her house looking for her son Jimmy.
Dades has to be cautious. Heidel is accusing 2 retired cops of involvement in a suspected homicide. But Dades is impressed with the clarity of Betty's memory and her conviction that Eppolito was involved. Something in his gut tells the detective that Heidel is telling the truth. His investigation will lead him to uncover the most shocking abuse of the badge in the history of the NYPD. In 2003, New York cold case detective Tommy Dades suspects that 10 years earlier, retired NYPD cop Lou Eppolito and his associate Stephen Caracappa were involved in the disappearance of wannabe mobster Jimmy Heidel. Eppolito had family ties to the Gambino crime family, and at the time, he was under suspicion for feeding information to the Mafia. Dades takes his concerns to the head of the Brooklyn Rackets Division, Assistant District Attorney Mike Vecchione. Vecchione listens carefully as Dades outlines the story he got from Betty Heidel.
He came to me one morning, as he did many times before, and said, "I think I got something on Eppolito. Are you interested?" I said, "Yeah, tell me about it. What do you have?" And he told me about Betty Heidel, that she called him and said, "You know, there's something that I meant to tell you." And she related to him the incident involving Eppolito and Caracappa on the day that Jimmy Heidel disappears. So he said, "I think that that's enough." He said, "Do you think it's enough to open up an investigation into, Jimmy Heidel's death?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And that's how we started the investigation.
Maybe something was missed in the initial investigation into Heidel's disappearance, so Dades orders the old NYPD and FBI case files.
The initial hope was to solve the murder of Jimmy Heidel.
But given Jimmy Heidel's connections to the Mafia, the investigation quickly broadens to include other cases that involve the mob.
Tommy found out that there were boxes and boxes of material that were kept there as part of all of the investigations that were going on into the mob around that time frame, 10 years before. So we were able to get permission from the head of the organized crime section of the U.S. Attorney's Office to find the ones that he thought would be pertinent to an investigation into Caracappa and Eppolito. And he did. He found, I think it might have been about 10 boxes worth of materials.
Joe Ponzi was at the heart of Vecchione's investigation.
Once we received all the reports and data, we created a war room in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. My curiosity was piqued. I had made up my mind that this was going to be examined and once again put to rest one way or the other.
In the hunt for Eppolito's name, they have to cast the net wide. The search takes them to a character at the heart of the FBI crackdown on the 5 big crime families back in the 1980s. The RICO Act had forced many top mafiosi to break the vow of silence and turn informer. One of them was a brutal underboss of the Luchese crime family, Anthony Gaspipe Casso. Facing the rest of his life in prison, Casso offered up everything to the feds.
He decided to become a government witness.
Casso held nothing back, and none of his former associates were safe.
The way that the government debriefs people like him is they sit him in a room for days and they go through his entire history. So not only is he giving up himself, he's giving up everybody else who he has ever been involved with.
Dades and Ponzi are intrigued to discover that among the many names that Casso gives up are the NYPD cops, Lou Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa. Given Eppolito's court victory and his bleeding heart biography, the investigators are stunned to find Casso connecting him to the Luchese underboss.
I found that incredibly shocking. I struggled with the idea that this could be true.
Casso first mentions the two cops in connection with the abduction of a man who was handed over to the Mafia. Central to the story was a close associate called Bert Kaplan. Kaplan told Casso that back in the 80s he had a big problem. It was the height of the informant epidemic. And Kaplan believed he was going to be ratted on. So Kaplan wanted the rat to disappear.
He was going to be the witness that put Kaplan away. Kaplan wanted him gone.
He wanted to have that problem disappear from the equation, so to speak.
And Kaplan had the means to make it happen. While he was inside Pennsylvania's Allenwood prison, he met an inmate with a story too good to be true. The inmate knew two crooked NYPD cops who could track down informants. At the time, Kaplan was cautious.
At first blush, Bert wasn't interested. He was distrustful of cops. He felt that two cops that were willing to go to that level to betray their own oath and badges probably couldn't be trusted.
But now he had a rat threatening to put him behind bars. Kaplan got back in touch with his old prison buddy.
In relatively short order, he said they're willing to do it. And a $25,000 fee was agreed upon for the abduction and murder of Israel Greenwald.
In the transcripts, Casso states that in February 1986, the two cops pulled the rat over.
They told him that he was the subject of a hit-and-run investigation, that he had to accompany them back to Brooklyn to stand in a lineup. Greenwald complied, got in the unmarked police car.
But the cops didn't drive him to the station. Eppolito and Caracappa drove the man to a Brooklyn garage and handed him over to the mob. The mobsters shot the man dead and forced the garage owner to dig a grave in the dirt floor and bury the body. Ponzi can barely believe what he's reading.
I wanted to step out of the room and vomit in a garbage pail when he started to get into the depth of the conspiracy.
But Dades was to discover far worse, as Casso reveals the real role the two cops played in the disappearance of Betty Heidel's son, Jimmy. In 2003, detectives from the DA's office in New York are investigating two retired NYPD detectives, Lou Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa. The FBI transcripts of an interview with former Luchese underboss, Gaspipe Casso, include disturbing allegations that the NYPD cops were hired by another mobster to abduct a victim and deliver him into the hands of a Mafia hit squad. Now, Casso reveals that he had hired the cops himself. Buried in the files, Casso's confession reveals the full story behind the disappearance of Betty Heidel's son, Jimmy. And once again, the NYPD cops appear to be at the heart of it. The story starts with a failed attempt on Casso's life.
Casso had made an appointment to meet an associate of his for a discussion about some stolen treasury bills, but in fact he had been set up. While he was sitting in his own car, shots erupted.
Casso is injured, but manages to escape into a nearby restaurant.
Casso, he was out of his mind with rage and anger and was willing to do anything to exact revenge on the individuals who were responsible for that attempt on his life.
This time, Casso asks his old prison contact, Bert Kaplan, to contract the police detectives Eppolito and Caracappa to find out who tried to kill him.
Kaplan and Casso liked using Eppolito and Caracappa because they were a known, reliable entity in terms of getting what they needed.
As fate would have it, Eppolito worked in the very NYPD precinct where the attempt on Casso's life had taken place. With an investigation already underway, it was easy for him to discover who the police thought was behind the attack. Detective Eppolito passes the names to Kaplan, who forwards them to Casso. One of the names on the list was Betty Heidel's young son, Jimmy. But the cops' involvement didn't end there. They also took Casso's money to finish the job. That was when Eppolito and Caracappa went to Jimmy Heidel's house in Staten Island and grabbed Jimmy's brother, Frankie, by mistake. When they realized they had the wrong brother, Eppolito and Caracappa let Frankie go. But not before they were seen by Frankie's mother, Betty. During his confession, Casso explains what happened next. Later that day, Eppolito and Caracappa finally tracked down Jimmy Heidel. They arrested him on the street and bundled him into their police vehicle.
They met him and put him in their car, handcuffed, and told him that they were taking him back to the police station. They were going to ask him some questions. All seemed to be above board for a bad guy like Jimmy Heidel. I mean, he was always a hanger-on, a wannabe in terms of mobster. So getting put in a police car is nothing unusual for him. Problem for him was that he was not going to a station house.
He was taken to a house, tied to a chair in the basement of a house, and tortured.
Kaplan and Casso tortured Jimmy Heidel for hours. Until the kid gave up the men behind the failed hit on Casso. Jimmy's body is eventually buried in the basement. Casso has the names of the men who tried to kill him: Nicky Guido and Eddie Lino. Two names that rang a strong bell with the investigation team.
It was like a roadmap for us into the activities of the Mafia cops.
Now the Luce's underboss had to finish the job. He wanted to show his enemies that if they wanted to kill him, they better do the job properly. The first target for his revenge would be Nicky Guido. Casso sends his 2 NYPD moles to track him down.
He had a tool that none of the other families had, which is why he often and somewhat euphemistically referred to them as his crystal ball. It allowed him the opportunity to see things that no one else could see.
Detective Caracappa finds several men called Nicky Guido in the area. He passes on the best matches to Casso. On Christmas Day, 1986, Casso sends gunmen to Nicky Guido's address. They find Guido outside, talking with his uncle in a car parked near his house. Neither man pays any attention to the approaching vehicle. Casso's men strafe the car with bullets. Within seconds, Nicky Guido is dead. Only this is the wrong Nicky Guido. Casso's men killed an innocent kid showing his uncle his new car on Christmas Day. According to Casso, even though the wrong Guido had been killed, Eppolito and Caracappa were rewarded for their help. The 2 cops went on the Mafia payroll. Casso and Kaplan paid them $4 grand a month with a bonus check for each murder they committed.
When I found out that they were on the mob payroll, I was flabbergasted. I had never heard of anything like that in all the years that I had been involved in law enforcement. The district attorney called it the most serious case of police corruption in the history of the New York City Police Department.
Casso's confession is dynamite. The more Vecchione discovers, the more he wonders why the feds didn't act.
I was shocked that the FBI didn't bring it to the attention at least of the Internal Affairs Bureau of the police department.
A little discreet digging gives them an answer they don't want to hear.
The FBI did not take full advantage of the information they got from Gaspipe because he was crazy. Gaspipe Casso made outrageous claims. Some were true, as it turned out, others were not true. He also had something to gain. He was imprisoned for the rest of his life. And the only possibility he ever had of getting out was trading information. And I think the FBI finally decided that you could never put him on the witness stand.
The FBI were not happy with Gaspipe as far as his credibility is concerned. So they were not going to base any prosecution on Gaspipe alone.
If Casso's word isn't enough, Dades needs something to prove he's telling the truth. Then it hits him. If Caracappa had tracked down Guido, then his search should be logged on the police computer system. When any officer makes a search, it's listed under his tax number. As Dades works through Caracappa's searches, he finds what he's looking for. Hard evidence to back up Casso's confession.
I'll never forget the day Tommy came running down to my office and said, "We got him now. We definitely have him." And I said, "What are you talking about? What do you got?" He said, "You see this printout?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Look who ran it." I said, "Well, I see is a tax number. Whose tax number is that?" He goes, "It's Caracappa's tax number." Look down the list. Look at the names that he looked for.
Caracappa had searched for one Nicky Guido.
I was thrilled. That's the first time that we had something other than words. We had now something which tied Caracappa to the murder of an innocent victim. It was that murder, quite frankly, more than any of the others in the case, that really got to me and kind of kept me going and digging, and it affected all of us. And we really wanted to get these guys.
Days before an innocent boy is shot dead by the mob, Caracappa had cops search for his address on the police database. But it's still not enough. Eppolito had already escaped one half-baked court case. With so much at stake, they wanted to make sure any future case was absolutely watertight. Dades returns to Casso's confessions to see if there was more. And sure enough, he finds it, and it's horrifying. The rogue cops went from being the mob's delivery men to their executioners. In 2003, Detective Tommy Dades is investigating two corrupt NYPD cops. He's found shocking evidence buried in the archived confessions of Luce's underboss Anthony Gaspipe Casso that the two cops used their badges to abduct people and hand them over to the Mafia. But then Dades discovers something else in the confessions, which, if true, drags the name of the force down to a new low. After the failed assassination attempt on Gaspipe Casso, the underboss swore revenge on the men who tried to kill him. He hired Eppolito and Caracappa to hunt down his would-be assassins. After capturing, torturing, then murdering the second of the shooters, Jimmy Heidel, they got the names of two more failed assassins. The first revenge attack led to the death of an innocent young man, Nicky Guido. But although the wrong man was killed, Casso was unrepentant. He wanted the third shooter dead too, a hitman named Eddie Lino. Lino was a close friend of New York crime boss John Gotti, so he was a hard man to get to. Casso turns once again to the corrupt cops Eppolito and Caracappa. They pull Lino over on a desolate road, like he's committed a routine traffic violation. But with the mob cops, nothing is routine. Caracappa pulls a gun and shoots Lino at point-blank range. Lino dies instantly. The detectives have turned a corner. They're now fully fledged killers. The feds call Casso unreliable, but Vecchione's team believed Casso's revelations are just too detailed to be ignored. With corroborating evidence hard to come by, the detectives decide to find another source to back Casso's claims. And there was one name in Casso's confession that cropped up time and again: Casso's go-between, Bert Kaplan.
Kaplan was the missing ingredient. He was absolutely the essential piece on putting this entire conspiracy together.
At the time, Kaplan is serving 27 years in prison on a drugs charge, and so far has resisted all attempts to flip him. He simply refuses to turn informant.
He was just a hard-boiled, stubborn, old wise guy that would never break the code. He honestly believed that cooperation was never an option.
Vecchione doesn't give up hope. He knows one man who can turn even the toughest mobsters. And he's already on the team. Vecchione gives Joe Ponzi the challenge of his career: crack Kaplan.
I've known Joe Ponzi for probably 35 years, and he was a guy who can talk to people. For whatever reason, they open up.
Ponzi starts by trying to put the squeeze on Kaplan.
The first step was to get Bert out of his element and move him closer. On my first meeting, I made it clear to him that he might be that much more uncomfortable over at Rikers Island, a local city penitentiary that most inmates just hated to be housed in. I quickly learned that threatening Bert was not the way to go. He raised up on me and said, "You move me there, I could self-medicate myself and kill myself anytime I want. You move me there, I'll kill myself instantly, and that'll be on your head." He made it perfectly clear that that style of sort of threatening approach was not going to work.
Ponzi tries a different tack. If he can't threaten him, maybe he can appeal to his conscience.
I felt that maybe if I threw some names at him, maybe if I, hit him with some of the names of the homicide victims that we believed were, part of this entire conspiracy, that would have some impact.
At first, it seems to be going nowhere.
I began with Jimmy Heidel. I went to Eddie Leno.
Kaplan isn't cracking, but Detective Ponzi is holding one name back. Not a mobster, not an informant, but an innocent kid riddled with bullets on Christmas Day, Nicky Guido.
I saw his face just turn from a scowl to almost beet red. And he said, "That's what I can't stand about you guys. You think you know things that you don't know. You don't know anything about Nicky Guido." And he got up, and it appeared as if he was going to walk out the door. And I said, "Wait, Mr. Kaplan, maybe I don't know. Tell me what I don't know. Sit down and explain to me what I don't know." And he sat back down.
Kaplan opens up. Ponzi has achieved what no one else ever has. He has found a way of getting this hardened criminal to flip.
Nicky Guido, a kid who was showing his uncle his brand new shiny red car on Christmas morning. And that's what ultimately got to Bert Kaplan. And he agreed to testify.
In a series of interviews, one by one, Kaplan corroborates all of Casso's allegations. The abductions, the murders, even the cops going on the Mafia payroll. And in return for a reduced sentence, he even agrees to take the stand.
He gave up everything. Bert Kaplan gave up every single thing that he knew about Eppolito and Caracappa, which included all of the murders, everything that they had done to betray the badge that they were both carrying.
It's the breakthrough the team have been working so hard to achieve. In Las Vegas, March 2005, law enforcement finally have enough evidence to indict Eppolito and Caracappa, and they swoop in. But will the hardened cops go quietly, or will they go down shooting? March 2005. Retired cops Lou Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa have been exposed as mob killers. Las Vegas police swoop in to arrest the crooked cops. They give themselves up without a fight. March 2006. When the two cops stand trial in New York for kidnapping and murdering for the Mafia, the case causes a sensation.
I think it is the biggest corruption scandal in the history of the New York City Police Department. The acts that they performed and the investigations that they compromised and breached in totality makes this, without question, the biggest police corruption case in the history of New York City.
Eppolito and Caracappa face a long list of charges, including murder, obstruction of justice, narcotics distribution, and money laundering. It's a long list of crimes, all supported by mob informant Bert Kaplan's critical testimony.
The specific nature of his information was so detailed, so fine, just so incredibly and impeccably laid out and corroborated independently, so many different ways, that we were all very confident going forward that this would result in a successful prosecution. There are Some organized crime authorities who say that he was quite possibly the most powerful cooperating witness they ever saw testify.
The evidence against the corrupt cops is overwhelming. And in April 2006, after just 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returns their verdict. Eppolito and Caracappa are found guilty on all counts. They're both sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility for parole.
I was elated. I knew that that was the end of the road for them. I kind of exhaled and said, okay, it's finally over. I'm not shy about taking credit for it. If it hadn't been for Tommy, if it hadn't been for me, if it hadn't been for Joe Ponzi, they'd still be walking free today.
Eppolito and Caracappa thought they'd gotten away with it. And had they kept a lower profile, they would have gotten away with it.
My feelings about Eppolito and Caracappa are that they are akin to the devil, quite frankly. They take a shield for which people put trust and betrayed it. They're akin to Satan. I hate them. I hate them.
I don't think that anybody could give you a fair estimate of how much damage these two people did to the NYPD. There's no way of assessing the total amount of damage done.
As Lou Eppolito's family had connections to the Mafia, one question hangs in the air. Was Eppolito actually a Mafia sleeper? Did the mob place him in the NYPD? Or was he just a good cop gone bad?
Based upon everything that I know about Louis Eppolito, I do not believe that the mob planted him in the New York City Police Department. I think that he had the background of bad guys in his family, and when the opportunity presented itself for him to make money and become a rogue, he took it.
Perhaps the most baffling question is why, having retired to Las Vegas, Eppolito risked everything by putting his career in the public eye.
Eppolito really believed he had gotten away with it. There are certain personalities where enough is never enough. He wanted to brag about it. He wanted to be able to telegraph to the world what he had done without anyone knowing what he had done.
The mob cops case remains the most shocking example of police corruption in New York City's history. It's thanks to the courage of Betty Heidel and to the efforts of detectives Dades, Vecchione, and Ponzi that the bad cops finally got the justice they deserved. The ruthless and unrepentant Mafia cops have exhausted all appeals. Eppolito and Caracappa will never be released from federal prison.